Thank you, Dr. Accaria. My name is Marina Smirnova, and I am psychology core faculty at Saybrook University. I've been at Saybrook since 2013, and I happen to be in the Department of Humanistic Psychology and also oversee consciousness, spirituality, and integrative health utilization as its director. And I have been formally involved with clinical hypnosis through the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis since once upon a time, March of 2008, Chicago in-person conference, which followed by a Seattle conference the very next month. The Dalai Lama encounter that we all who were present had an opportunity to be a part of and experience his touch direct. Actually, yes, that's kind of the synchronistic unfolding of how hypnosis can touch many lives. Yes, literally and metaphorically. And it is such a pleasure to be in this session together with a dear colleague who is so generously agreed without hesitation to join us today on a short notice and yet with such a vibrant conversation. Dr. Philip Accaria, welcome and welcome to Saybrook.
Thank you, Marina. I hail from New Jersey, born and raised in a very diverse county of Italians, Irish, Portuguese, Spanish, blacks, and it was absolutely exquisite, absolutely exquisite. And let's see, I did my undergraduate at NYU back in 1970 to 74. And I took my PhD at USIU, which then got bought out by California School of Professional Psych and then by Alliant University. And then over the course, hypnosis. In retrospect, I realized I was doing performance-enhancing self-hypnosis as an athlete from 14 years old on, in fencing, actually. And then came across the writings of Milton Erickson in an independent study I took at USIU in 1981. Then trained in Ericksonian work, utilization work in 86, and then my mentor, Harriet Hollander, who's of ASH, she and I reconstituted the Clinical Hypnosis Society of New Jersey in 1989, and then I began teaching ideomotor signaling, classic ideomotor signaling, back in 92, and then ultimately, wound up, Eric, moderator of the ASH Board of Governors, and then past president of ASH. So I've been on their faculty for those many years. And Dr. Philip Pell out of Maryland and I, who were students at USIU, he a year ahead of me, ultimately we came to create a series of workshops entitled A Gathering of Healers. And it was really designed to give folks who work in the transpersonal, non-ordinary realms an opportunity to just talk about what they do, and that became even more involved. So we began teaching people how to develop their intuitive skills, very much like the work that psychiatrist Judy Orloff out of California had been doing. And I studied with Alberto beginning mid-2002, and then took his 2-year training, and then I also decided to train concurrently with one of his proteges, a Dominican nun, registered nurse, Italian from City Island, Bronx, in New York. So in January I'd get the masculine perspective, in March I'd get the feminine perspective, and that went back and forth for about 2.5 years. So I'm completely confused, but that's okay. And that's about it. Anything else I should say, Marina? What do you think? I don't know. That's
Anything you'd like, Dr. Accaria. Thank you so much. And also for those of us who are on the call, I'll place our topic in the chat today, and also overview for those who will be listening later. Our overarching topic for today is hypnosis and transpersonal experiences, utilization of clinicians' trance experience with ideomotor signaling for verification. Yeah, so Dr. Accaria, you can take this off in any direction you'd like, because we're all ears and we are so privileged to be in this conversation with you and witness your wisdom and to learn with you and receive your transmissions.
Yeah. Let me just tell you, I'm not highly hypnotizable, but I'm in some ways profoundly suggestible. So now I'm going to see your images with extremely defined ears and little faces, and it's going to make me laugh. But with that said, my work is primarily in independent practice. Over the last 15, 20 years, colleagues who knew that I do indigenous energy medicine practice and work will, who have attended my workshops, will call me and say, I'm stuck with this client. What do you think? And ultimately that turned into a substantial practice where the clinician, her client or his client would be together physically, and then I would do remote work, remote healing work, and I would use the intuitive gifts to see and understand data and information pertaining to the client. I'll clarify that in a little bit. And then the clinician would be utilizing the muscle testing, which I conceptualize as ideomotor signals. If you have a thought in mind that is sound, your body will, with a number of variables already attended to, and I'll talk about that. When you consider a concept of proposition that's sound, for example, 2 + 2 are 4, the body will demonstrate effortless strength. And that's true for somebody who's a weightlifter or a mason or a massage therapist in comparison to a 90-year-old arthritic person. Each person has a differential response between what is their strong response and their weak response. So these guys and gals would be testing their clients and assessing the veracity of what I would say. There's a movie that comes to mind. Is it entitled Ghost? Demi Moore.
Yes, I believe so.
And I forget the actor, a very famous actor. And
Bruce
Whoopi.
Willis.
I love it. And Whoopi Goldberg was playing a medium, and she was just lying, complete lying about everything she saw, just hoodwinking people out of money. So that would make me laugh, and I'm thinking, well, here's a way to test that. How many of how do we do this? How many of you are or are not familiar with classic ideomotor signaling? One, few. Eric, you know it, of course. Okay. I'm going to offer you an opportunity to experience this wherever you are. And this is the classic hypnotic form of ideomotor signaling, which capitalizes on the experience of dissociation. Dissociation between conscious volitional activity and non-conscious physical activity. And here's how it works. Let's see. For all of you who were born and remain right-handed, you would use your right hand. Place your elbow on a surface. Let your wrist bend. And for those of you who were born left-handed and trained to be right-handed, I would encourage you to use your left hand, because I've learned over time that that person's right hand would not respond. The left hand would. And here's how that unfolds. And this work is popularized by a once businessman who became a master's level psychologist. His name is Leslie Leckrone, Lecron. And then the work that Leslie Leckrone taught OBGYN David Cheek, MD, and then David Cheek and Ernest Rossi worked together, capitalizing on the dissociative experience. And here's how it typically unfolds. You invite the person to invite, all right. Most of my colleagues who are very much in the secular paradigm and frame of mind would speak of their wise, non-conscious inner mind. I, on the other hand, who have studied the spiritual components of healing, for example, in the indigenous communities worldwide, Alberta would say it goes back 30,000, 40,000 years, but with that said, in these indigenous cultures, one of the premises and foundations of their healing interventions and their diagnostic approaches is this. We are spiritual beings having human experiences. The spiritual part, over my years of practice, has become differentiated into two aspects of the spiritual. One is a term that many of us are familiar with, and I refer to that as the soul. The soul is that divine part of us that does experience trauma, and those traumas reportedly can be carried over in what some consider additional lifetimes. There is the other part that I've come to conceptualize, and the reason Marina asked me to be part of this is because as she and I were having a conversation about this stuff, she would see that I'm putting my fingers under the table lip, pressing my thumb down, and then pulling up on my thumb to test for whether I had a strong or weak response to a hypothesis I just shared with her. That is muscle testing. It's called the kinesiology response, and it is, in my conceptualization, an ideomotor signal. You have an idea, and you have a motoric response. With that said, let's go back to this classic hypnotic ideomotor experience. So I invite you to invite whatever you consider to be your wise unconscious mind. For me, it's my high self. That's my divine self that is impervious to trauma. And that is the omniscient part, and that is the expert part of me. I'm not the expert of my client. That part of them is, and I want to establish a communication system with that part of them. And then that directs our triage of what symptom to work with first and what tool to utilize to intervene on that symptom. And then I say the bottom line is it doesn't matter what I hypothesize or I share with you or what you believe. The important part is the proof in the pudding. Is the symptom shifted durably? Period. Okay. So let's go back to the classic ideomotor signal. So you can invite your unconscious mind or you can invite your high self to choose the finger it would most enjoy to use for the response yes. Now, some of you might be virtuosos, and as I'm describing this, you're already having responses. The greatest percentage of us seem to have no response whatsoever. And one of the ways of generating that response energetically is to consider in your mind things yes. My name is Karen. My name is Tamara. I am such and such years old. I live in such and such a place. My last name is such and such. I have, etc., etc., etc. All things yes. And that supposedly will generate yes energy, and you'll find that the movement is dissociated. In other words, if my thumb twitches like that, people will say, I didn't do that. And that's exactly correct. That's when you know you're there. So we establish a yes response, and then in gratitude we thank that part of ourselves that responded. And then we go for which which finger would the high self or the unconscious mind most enjoy and prefer to use for the response? No. David Cheek, who worked with me as a subject, said, I have an automatic yes. It was hilarious as I thought to myself, I don't think so. But that is my yes. Now, Joe Zastro, former president of ASH, said, that's only because the ligaments are designed differently in your finger. And I said, shut up, Joe. Shut up. Yeah, let's go with the metaphysical. And then the no emerged, and that was the thumb twitch. And then we asked, Leslie Crone and David Cheek discovered that in their training of physicians, very linear folks, MDs, not even DOs, would overuse and abuse the answer, I don't know. So they replaced I don't know with a magnificently elegant suggestion and alternative response for privacy and timing. And that response is, I do not want to respond to that question yet. And the yet, of course, an indirect suggestion that eventually it will emerge. So the way you access that response is you ask the high self, would you like options for that third response? And if you get a yes, then you say, okay, choose the finger you would like to use for I don't want to answer yet. And then you record those. Generally speaking, those answers remain stable over time. For any of you who are familiar with is he a pharmacist? He was a chemist, Chevreul, back in the 1800s, Chevreul's pendulum. If any of you have used a pendulum, your responses are typically stable. A yes is oftentimes to and fro movement, and a no is typically side to side. Okay. I find that in my experience personally, and as well as with my clients, this dissociated movement is a profound ratifier. First, of the fact that when we as clinicians utilize Erickson's language, you'll hear us say, and isn't it nice to know that you have a conscious mind and you have a non-conscious inner mind. And sometimes both of those minds agree, and sometimes they have different opinions. And you can utilize the conscious mind to research all the logical data that is necessary to ultimately allow your unconscious mind to incubate and collate and cook that data to show you the answer for the next step within. All right. And that dissociated response gets everybody. It really does. Like, it spooks some people out. Okay. Now, I find in the years of utilizing this, and I've been practicing, since 1976, I think. Yeah. I find that more individuals are more immediately and efficiently adept at experiencing muscle testing. Classic muscle testing, you can learn about that, read about that. Articles written by Kendall and Kendall et al. David R. Hawkins in his works, Power versus Force, Truth versus Falsehood. John Diamond, MD, psychiatrist originally from Syracuse, who studied with his teacher, a chiropractor by the name of George Goodhart, back in the early 70s. So these are just a handful of people, no pun intended, who will talk about muscle testing. I've researched muscle testing several years ago on YouTube to see what people were putting out there, and I realized it's limited. So I'm fixing to do that. Maybe just put up or shut up kind of thing. Muscle testing. In its original form, It was devised along the lines of Goodhart, who used the deltoid muscle and would have the clinician press on the person's wrist saying, "Please remain strong." And you would get a kind of bouncing strength. And of course, you would check to see if their shoulders are fine. And I found any muscle group works, so I'll sit next to the client, having already assessed that the client is proper, amenable, and open and safe to use muscle testing as I do it. And that involves having them place the thumb to the tip of their ring finger, just because it's energetically more efficient. These guys are so strong you can hardly move them. If the person is very strong in their hands, I'd have them place the tip of their thumb to the tip of their pinky. With their permission, I would then hold with my index finger and my thumb, I would hold each of their fingers and I'd say, "Keep your fingers together," and I'd pull about a brisk 20 pounds of pressure. And we would calibrate their strong response. Once that's done, I would then check the variety of variables that can cause inaccuracies of the response. Initially, and very simplistically, I'll suggest for your consideration that the basic response is when you consider 2 plus 2 are 4, you have effortless strength. When you consider a proposition 2 plus 2 are 17, no matter how hard you try, you go weak. And that ratifies the experience for the individual. Oftentimes people will look at their fingers and then they'll look at me and I go, "What?" And some will get weirded out. So we have to process that experience. And in processing that experience, we are pacing and leading with each other, if you guys understand that construct. In other words, we're establishing rapport, but it's at their pace. A Serpa is no good if she or he is going to be 300 yards ahead of the person that they're guiding. You have to walk with them. Okay. Some of the variables that can interfere with the accuracy of muscle testing. And I'm going to explicate this because I'll invite you to practice muscle testing on your own, and you can practice with friends and family. Again, I'll turn my screen down. This is the tabletop. I will put my 4 fingers under the lip. I place my thumb on top, and I hook my index finger around my thumb, and then I think of a proposition and I pull up. Okay? Now here are the variables to attend to, some of the more immediate and most obvious. Or earbuds can inadvertently reverse your polarity. What that means is, when you think of a sound proposition, 2 plus 2 are 4, my name is Karen, my name is April, you will go weak. When you think of an incorrect proposition, my name is Philip, you'll go strong. There's a variety of reasons that polarity can reverse. Electromagnetic frequencies, fluorescent lighting, titanium crossing the bridge of a person's energetic median, an allergic response to polyesters or whatever the hell it is, not cotton, brass metal around the neck, if a client has come in and drove 20 minutes listening to acid rock, their polarity is reversed. If they came in listening to classical music, their polarity is fine. If my polarity is reversed and I'm energetically wired, like I'm an ADHD clinician, it reverses them. So I have to be balanced. Now, if you're sitting alone and you're doing your own muscle testing, you might, well, let me back up. One of the ways that we test polarity mechanically is the following. The individual will hold their arm out or will have their fingers together, and we will test their strength. Once the strong response is calibrated, we then ask them to take their opposite hand and place it about 2 inches above their head, palm facing the head. And we test the strength, and that should be strong. Then we have them turn their hand upside down above their head by about 2 inches, and we test their strength again. We say, be strong, keep your fingers together, and they go weak easily. Now, how do you test your polarity when you're only by yourself and you can't put your hand over your head and test your fingers? This is where folks like we transpersonal folks who value the truth of the fact that thought is real, and our thoughts have a direct physiological effect upon our clients and ourselves. And I have to pace and lead my clients for this phenomena because it's extraordinary. I say, do your muscle testing thing, but when you're testing for your polarity, visualize and intend that the hand that is pulling up on your thumb is also palm facing your head. And they'll be strong. Now intend that the back of your hand is facing the top of your head, and they test and they go weak. And then you have to process that because there's profound implications in that experience. Okay? Thought is real. I learned that through Fred Gallo, Gregory Nicosia when I studied the thought field therapy, and they utilized muscle testing. And then Alberto Vialdo utilized muscle testing in his indigenous medicine practices, where he was teaching people to be able to be clairvoyant, to see which chakra they thought was the most compromised in terms of then conducting an illumination energy healing. A lot of people were guessing, but some people were seeing. And then you would have the subject who's lying down just lift their hand up, and then this operator would test their muscle strength. So the operator was learning how accurate or inaccurate she was in the practice or the seeing.
One of the things that I noticed, I was at Carolyn Daitch's office, and she brought in somebody to do a demonstration with muscle tension. And then it seems like 2 or 3 times within the next couple of months, other people were doing muscle tensions, all apparently proving something different.
Mm-hmm.
Same technique. And it kind of left me
skeptical about the accuracy of muscle testing.
Well, about the, each one of them claimed the muscle tension was proving their point. And I'm wondering, the way you're explaining it now, that actually may make sense in terms of the muscle tension itself. So could you talk a little bit more about in terms of the applications of muscle tension and muscle testing and how we can use it clinically? Mm-hmm.
Sure. First of all, if I understand correctly, Eric, you're asking about the accuracy of the instrumentation.
Well, I guess it was the attributions to it.
All right. That word in my mind is bias. And that word in my mind is egocentric.
Well, and I think that's very accurate because each one of them, they were out there to prove something, and muscle testing was the vehicle that they were proving their theory, which in my mind was kind of invalidating it if we were using the exact same test to demonstrate different things.
Absolutely. And in fact, I advise those I share this with to be very careful about assessing something about oneself that you're intimately attached to. So when I was testing my level of consciousness, it was clear to me that, no. And we'll talk a little bit about level of consciousness. Marina, you can talk about it in terms of David Hawkins. And as I was preparing to test my own level of consciousness, I knew that there is a part of me that might be ego invested in it. So what I did is I did my testing, came up with that number, and then I tested friends, family, clients, who all were testing the same thing for themselves, and I tested that number across 10, 15 people. And that's how I got validation for that number. And then there's this issue when we work with ourselves or we work with our clients regarding authenticity. Do you want to know the truth of who and what you're about, where your strengths are, where your deficits are? And then I'll tell them a story. I watched a documentary back in 1987, and it was about Native Americans and indigenous cultures throughout the world and the construct of power animal. So one night, I think, all right, I want to know if I have one. So at bedtime in the hypnagogic state, I said, all right, high self, guardians, if I have one, show me. And then I go to sleep. And I wake up in the morning in that hypnagogic state, and I just kind of review my mind. And there's generally nothing there. And that went on for 13 nights and 13 mornings. But the 13th morning, there was a conversation in my head. And that conversation, I was busted. Because the conversation was, you really don't want to know. And the translation was, you want something elegant, something glamorous, something wonderful. Are you willing to accept the truth of the matter? And then I had to literally take a deep breath and think about that. And then I realized it is no fun playing life like it's no fun playing poker if I'm going to make believe I have cards. I'm going to get wiped out, and nobody's going to want to play with me. And then I thought, well, what if I was the most lowly life form on Earth? And I had to struggle with that. And then it finally came to me that if that's my truth, I need to know that. So I was committed to the truth. The following morning, I wake up and my eyes hurt. My eyes are closed, but my eyes hurt because I'm looking at something too close. As I, quote unquote, back up, I see what looks like a brown stucco wall. As I move to back up further, I see two yellow lights like railroad engineers' lanterns. As I back up a little further, I see what symbolically in my mind are two solid white lines on a highway. And I'm wondering, and then there's an automatic immediate zoom out, and what I'm looking at is an African bull elephant. The skin is the stuccoed wall. The eyes were the lanterns, and of course the white lines were its tusks. Now, as Dr. Smirnova loves synchronicity, 2 days later I have to take my injured cat 1 a.m. in the morning to the we'll take all the money you have 24-hour vet because she got lacerated. I forget to bring a book. I'm roaming around the office and I find a pamphlet in West Caldwell, New Jersey. We're not in the tundra of Africa. And the booklet is 8 pages on the front cover, the image of an African bull elephant, an Asian bull elephant, and the prehistoric pachyderm. And then it iterates all the similarities and differences between each of them. And I think to myself, now here's where I have to edit myself, April. I thought, how many effing elephants come to this place? So I realized this was the spirit saying, this is correct. This is accurate. All right. So in a long-winded answer with asides and diversions, Eric, I think part of the process is to negotiate and impress upon ourselves and our clients that we want the truth. And there are truths, even the ones that are idiosyncratic to each alone, nomothetic to all of humanity. Do you want to know the truth of who your power animal is? Or do you want something really glamorous? Well, I primarily. And when they say truth, I then muscle test them to see if their high self is in accord. Then I muscle test them again to see if their soul is in accord and agreement. When we get that, then we proceed forward. And then we double check ourselves Now, interestingly enough, one of the other variables that I discovered inadvertently reverses a person's polarity is the following. I'll describe it as I first learned it. I'm working with someone. The responses are very accurate. And then all of a sudden, the polarity seems to reverse. Because we were testing hypotheses that we knew were yes or we knew were no. And the responses were reversed. And when I wondered what's up with this, then I saw immediately a silhouette, kind of humanoid silhouette, up against the back of the person. And I saw it in the light frequency of its color, one of its signatures, one of its names. And I saw this like emerald green light behind this person. And I thought, what's this? And I heard, I'm one of the guardians. I thought, huh. Now, the guardian or angelic realm, I understand to be at a very high frequency, 50,000 cycles per second minimum. So I asked, would you be willing to move back like 20 feet? Therefore, it's floating outside the window of my office. And he said, sure. Then we tested the polarity. Client doesn't know any of this, but the rapport and the trust is sufficient that they will let me test. And I say, and I'll let you know what I'm testing after I test it. I said, all right, let's go back to 2 + 2 or 4, and now they're rock solid. And then telepathically, I'll invite that entity back. 2 + 2 goes weak. Now, assuming that they are amenable to these constructs, I'll then share with them what was happening. And then we do it again, and we do it again. So when I muscle test, I make sure that all the guardians stay a certain distance away so that we can get accurate responses. Now, some people are of such a high vibrational frequency that they don't reverse when the angelic realm comes close to them under fluorescent lights. So this is an example of some of the variables that need to be explicated and then addressed for when you're doing muscle testing. Does that help, Eric?
Yeah.
Okay.
All
right.
Dr. Accaria, this is fascinating and all at the same time deepening in so many ways. As you could see, the room is completely in awe.
Tamara looks pretty reasonable.
Yes, we're reasonably in awe. Reasonably in awe. And thank you so much for the invitation. And very briefly, that connection to David R. Hawkins' work and also to Don Diamond work, and both were physicians, MDs, yes, is very, very strong. For those of you who really would like to take a look at evidence-based underpinnings of this work, we recommend going to both of them. Specifically, Dr. Accaria mentioned David R. Hawkins. So he was an MD with specialty in psychiatry, and happened to, on top of this, get a PhD in the 90s. And he really, in his even dissertation, explored already muscle integration, and actually over the decades of intense study and collaboration with others, he was able to bring to us what we call a map of consciousness, right? Or a map of truth, or map of integrity. There are so many ways to speak towards that veracity that is at the core of that map. Goes from 1 to 1,000. And as Dr. Accaria mentioned, for example, angelic beings, such as, let's say, archangels, can calibrate at 50,000, right? So that map reflects what is humanly possible for us to hold as a human being with a nervous system of a human being. So in that map, it's represented between 1 and 1,000. Very briefly, you could find this map easily at your fingertips through the search engine of your choice. There are many diagrams for this, but very briefly, there are two critical lines for us to keep in mind. And Dr. Accaria knows this exceptionally well, and he teaches this also as well. One is a level of courage at a 200, and the second one is a level of love at 500. Why is the level of courage is so important? Well, to David R. Hawkins, from his perspective, it is a moment where we take enough responsibility for ourselves, where we are stepping into an identity, if you will. Identity is my word, an identity of a being who is a heroic being. And we also stop attracting the detrimental forces of the world that is we're very much subject to below 200. And that is to say, we over our lifetime experience all sorts of domains from 1 to 1,000. No shame in it, right? Because actually shame happens to be one of the most detrimental and difficult stages, which we highly discourage, and we are obliged to help each other and ourselves to navigate it in such a way that we, even in a way of attitude, holding beliefs that we are here, we belong, and therefore we're going to continue to support ourselves and each other in rising, right, together. This is what also transpersonal movement is, in some sense, helping each other to rise. And so level of courage helps us to say, okay, I am here. I have what it takes for the most part, right? And I will continue to utilize principles and attitudes that are truthful enough, right, to get the results that are really life supporting and life honoring, which is very, very important. So the energies in some sense below 200, they do not fully honor life. That's another way for us to take a look. Why would we want to be at 200 or above? And David R. Hawkins was so magnificent with his sense of humor too. He said quite often as human beings, we want to calibrate ourselves. Where are we on the scale? Hey, why wouldn't we, right? And then he says, all you have to worry about, not even worry about, but really, I would even say, would welcome, is being at 200 or above, right? And from there on, there's entirely, almost like the whole energy of life supports us to move forward. Now, the second one is 500, but below it is the domain of intellect for all of us in academia. Oi, 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 oi. Isn't it valuable to know and to remember the domain of intellect alone can take us only from 400 to 499. And the great thinkers of humankind, such as Einstein and others, are at 499. But then there's a paradigm shift. At 500, dogs are wagging their tail. At 500, birds are chirping. At 500, the whole animal kingdom somehow joins in the cosmic song of love, Love. Could it be that when we are able to experience, even momentarily, even for a stretch of time, the 540, which for David R. Hawkins is unconditional love, which in and out of itself generates spontaneously healing opportunities? Why? Because it's a powerful field, right? And when we form our practice on that foundation of unconditional love, I would say, as scholar practitioners, yes, when we, as human beings, when we dare to say, I'm going to cultivate unconditional love as much as I reasonably can, and I will return to this as my home base, right, as my, where I make my tent. All of a sudden, we are creating for ourselves and others spontaneous healing opportunities, because at 540, we are in the field of spontaneous healing. It's that powerful. And of course, above 500, there are different states of enlightenment, and we can have them through mystical experiences, through spiritual practices. And notice that the scale is logarithmic. And Dr. Accaria keeps reminding me this. Thank you for reminding me this. Logarithmic, meaning even as we inch up a point, 2, 3, 5, 10 over a lifetime, we are the benefit of it is far more than numerical, because it's logarithmic. It's amount a whole lot more. For instance, a one person, let's say in 800s, can counterbalance the lower levels of consciousness for incredibly large number of human beings. Yes. And so keep in mind that we are in this together. And so back to you, Dr. Accaria. Thank you so much for bringing David R. Hawkins and for reminding me, by the way, about John Diamond. Yes. So I hold you as positively responsible for me diving back in a much different level to John Diamond's work, which I highly also recommend. Thank you. What a gift you gave me.
I take responsibility for that. Okay. When Marina says it's logarithmic, as you all know, I'll just reiterate, that means the number 200 is 10 to the 200th power. So when she says an increase of 5 numbers, like to 205, is dramatic increase in level of consciousness. Level of consciousness I conceptualize as our movement closer and closer to direct communion with our Creator. The level 540 is the calibration of the 12-step program of AA. And interestingly enough, I'm certified as an alcoholism and drug counselor, and I had to do 90 and 90 as part of my training. And I heard them say to the people who were still using, just bring the body. And I asked one of them, one of the seasoned veterans, I said, what is that about? And I had not studied this yet. And they said, it's as if what we speak of in this program touches a person's soul. So it's like they learn through osmosis, and then ultimately it becomes conscious and it becomes volitional as they work through the steps. Generally speaking, Hawkins said, in his opinion, and what he called his research, which was his wife sitting next to him and he would touch her and answer, a soul will advance maybe 5 points in a lifetime. Of course, assuming that we have more than one lifetime. However, in instances such as developing and maintaining sobriety through the 12-step program and or a near-death experience, the soul advances from 150 to 200 points in one lifetime. That's 40 lifetimes. That's a person who's taken an AP course in life on Earth. Anyway, so I'll utilize ideomotor signaling, classic and or muscle testing, to ratify with clients that the hypotheses I'm sharing with them are viable. And then we use the ideomotor signaling to determine whether or not the high self has agreed to accept that in the timing that was appropriate for that client. And when they see that it says yes, clients are more inclined on a conscious daily human level to implement those strategies that you invite them to practice. Certain affirmations, certain behavioral attitudes, certain prayers, certain intentions, and they're more willing to embrace that. And then they have, in part, that beautiful thing called the placebo response. They're accessing that healing part of themselves without even knowing why. I'll tell you, that hour goes by in a minute and a half, Doc. I swear.
It does, doesn't it? Dr. Accaria, may I ask you, please, review with us one more time, perhaps in a different way, because in hypnosis, right, the rule of 3 or 4, repetition of very important concepts, is at play, alive and well. One more time, how you do muscle testing using the desk, right, even for yourself, and also setting up the signals. And reminding us, left hand, right hand from birth, not from birth, etc., so that we can actually begin to implement it on a deeper level.
Okay. So the first one is the classic ideomotor signaling that's part and parcel of the hypnotic processes that we learn. And that is simply let your hand rest and then invite. All right, I'll add this to the mix. As you know, healthcare workers, physicians, surgeons, nurses, attendants, will make sure to the best of their ability that they and the environment are bacteria free. So we scrub. Okay. I do a similar practice energetically when I work with people. I create what the indigenous folks would refer to as sacred space. So I invite the divine and holy beings from all four directions, and then from below and above to come in and protect the space, because if I'm going to be accessing intuitive information and they might be accessing past life personalities, we don't want portals open for any of the darkness to come in. And I contend, obviously, that there's darkness. Okay. So in that sacred environment, I'll then invite my high self to choose the finger, so it's not a diabolic force choosing the finger to say yes. And I just keep practicing that until it emerges. And sometimes it'll take moments, sometimes it takes hours, sometimes it takes days and weeks for people to get that response. And that's all proper for them. So I get the yes, I get the no, and I ask, do you want? I don't want to answer yet. If I get a yes, I determine that. That's classic ideomotor, ideodynamic signaling. That can be used in accessing information that's deeply buried, that is trauma-based, and brought to the surface where it then becomes conscious and then can be worked with. That's a whole other year of experience. Next is the muscle testing. Now, some people do muscle testing. Some of our colleagues, Claire Frederick, Eric, they would just rub their fingers and they would say that, oh, there's more friction there, that's no. Or there's less friction, that's yes. For me, it's much more, you got to pull on my fingers and I got to trust that response. That's my personality. So I can't do this. Others will put their middle finger and thumb together and then put their index finger in the middle of that, and then they'll hold the proposition in mind and then they pull. That works for some. That doesn't work for me. For me, it's going back to the tabletop, place my four fingers underneath the lip, place my thumb on top, hook my finger around that, and then I hold the proposition 2 + 2 are 4, and I test. If that's strong, I test 2 + 2 are 7. If that's weak, I trust that my polarity is in line. And then before I test anything for myself or my clients, I test that according to that which is holy and healthy, what I intend to test is allowed. I have permission to test the hypothesis I want to test. And what that means is that answer, one way or another, is in the highest good of that client's time and space right now. And I've had that conversation with them before we get there. Okay. And then we go ahead and test. So if I have permission, I test. This symptom, according to Lacrone and Cheek's 7 common causes of psyche-soma maladies, this symptom is caused by conflict. And then I muscle test. And I say to them, I'll explain to you each of these categories after we test. So they're testing blind, and they're observing differential responses, which amazes them. And that ratifies that there is non-conscious processes that are unfolding that gets their attention and reinforces that there's a part of them that knows them better than they consciously know themselves, and knows them better than I know them. So this is a real collaboration between clinician and client. It's a beautiful dance. It's a beautiful dance. It's a lovely way to practice. And we can determine whether or not what I was thinking was confabulated because I wanted to be magnificent, or what I was thinking was actual truth according to some divine reality. I don't know. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it for now.
That's beautiful. And one more question, perhaps, to you, Dr. Accaria.
Yes.
So
Philip.
Yes. Philip, Dr. Accaria.
Oh,
Yes.
good Lord.
This is the time where we recognize and witness, yes, your experience and wisdom and your experiential knowing, and therefore, Dr. Accaria. So, Dr. Accaria, A question for you. Years ago, among many hours, I've learned directly from Dr. Debney Ewing. Yes, how to work with those seven causal, right? Causal threads.
Yes.
Now, how would you recommend, or how would you describe the similarity, perhaps, and differences, kind of key points, and how your approach combines in some ways both, right? And yet, to me, it goes a bit deeper.
Okay. For those of you who have had the pleasure of at least seeing Dabney virtually or meeting him in person, this is the quintessential operational definition of a lovely angel in human form and a Southern gentleman. Just breaks my heart that he's gone. But anyway, I'd say to him, Dabney, you know, Lacrone and Cheek discovered that past experience, one of those seven variables, also came to include past life experience. You look at me and say, damn boy, I have enough trouble with this life. I ain't going there. You want to go there? You got that, but I ain't doing it. Now, Dabney would touch the person's index finger. He's a physician. He's touching people all the time. He would touch the index finger and move it like that and say, would it be okay if that was your yes response? And the person would consciously say yes. Would it be okay if that thumb was your no response? And they would agree. Compliance. Would that be okay if that pinky is that I don't want to say yet response? And they would comply. And I'm thinking, Dabney, what about the differential, unconscious, dissociated response? Don't talk to me, boy. I'm doing fine. And he did fine. So it worked because that was his energetics. That was his mastery. And his mastery, I would suggest, activated the potential of that person's self-healing processes or their divine processes.
Yeah, Dabney, also, you give your clients some options for which finger would they like to use. And he's maintained that I always use this is one, this is two, and he's because at my age, I can't remember which one I told him. So
That's exactly right. Thanks for sharing that part, Eric. So I would contend that the way my vibration works, the way the level of consciousness or lack thereof of my soul, and my expertise or lack thereof, this is how it seems to work best for the client I'm working with. He was a magician. He was an angel.
I just put a link in the chat if somebody wants to. If you haven't already met Dabney, here's an interview that I did with him eons ago. He's talking about, I think this one was about pain management, but he was certainly the character in not only national audience but international. I remember international meetings. You know, after he gave a talk, there'd be dozens of people standing around waiting for that chance to have a word with him. So even when he was well in his advanced age.
94. Yeah. There's a beautiful story, true story, where a woman comes to him and she is experiencing an absolutely maddening, painful, full-bodied rash. And she can't stop scratching. She's in her 80s. She had just lost her husband of 70 years, whatever it was. It was long. And her daughter brings her in and says, Dr. Ewan, I know that you do hypnosis, and I'm wondering if you might be able to help my mother. And Dabney uses his form of ideomotor signaling, and then they go through the 7 common causes. This is conflict. And she doesn't know what conflict is, and it says no. This is organ language, and it's yes. This is motivation, secondary gains, no. This is inadvertent suggestion. No, this is self-punishment. No, this is identification. No. And then he says to her, let's ask your inner mind if it would like. Yes. So he says to her, just pay attention and wonder, what does organ language mean? What's that got to do with my itching? Yada, yada, yada. And they're just sitting there quietly because it's in the silence that the work is being done. And she starts to cry. Gets me every time. And he says, what? And she says, essentially, I'm itching to be with my husband. And from there, he processed it with her, saying, you'll be there in time. So you might as well enjoy the remainder of your time poolside, in the sun, having fun, no itching, no cortisone, none of that stuff. And then he said, hi, self, has Madeline accepted that? Yes. Do you accept that? Yes. That ratified that interpretation, which she then took. And she cleared up. Talk therapy doesn't access this stuff.
What a beautiful example. Thank you so much to you both, Dr. Bulmer, too, for adding that video. And Dr. Accaria, what a wealth of experience and insight. And your sense of humor is so alive and well.